Welcome back to Pilgrimage, Manzanar Memory and Meaning. I am Elise, and today's episode is the second installment of a five-part podcast series from the Asian American Christian History Institute, exploring the tradition of pilgrimage to Manzanar through story, theology, and community. This is episode 2, titled Return. I am joined by my friend, Krystin, creative producer at Fuller Theological Seminary's Asian American Center. Krystin, would you please introduce yourself and share a bit about your role at the Manzanar Pilgrimage planning process and the work in which you lead at the Asian American Center?
Sure. Well, thanks, Elise, for having me on. I'm glad to have this conversation with you. So, as mentioned, I am the creative producer at the Asian American Center at Fuller Theological. It's a new role, but our hope is to make a lot of the academic expertise that we have at Fuller's, like seminary, more accessible to Asian American churches and Asian Americans in general when they're dealing with their faith and what spiritual formation looks like. For me personally, as a creative and working with different creatives, I see this as a cool opportunity to make things that kind of sound boring, like history, really appealing and even beautiful, to look back, to mourn, but also to remember there's still a bright future ahead of us, even though things around us might seem pretty dark. There's always another side of history that you can introduce.
Thank you so much for sharing, and congratulations on the new role. We're so excited for you and excited to see what you do in that space. And I wanted to really just thank you for taking the time to join me today. Your thoughtful preparation for the pilgrimage, from creating a sense of welcome to the intentional selection of food like bento, really showed a deep respect for cultural memory and the spiritual meaning of care. I came down with the flu and was unable to attend the pilgrimage, which was something that I was looking forward to being a part of. And I'm so glad I still get to be a part of it through this podcast. But I definitely felt that hospitality really extended to me, even when you delivered, to my door bentos, which was especially meaningful for me when I was sick with little energy to prepare food. And I even kept this, you said, we missed you. So I was like, and there's the heart on there. So, and the resource guide that you created, which was amazing as well. So I just love to begin with you sharing what you experienced on the ground there.
Yeah, it was interesting, just a preparation process in general, because we were really looking at a pilgrimage that Fuller has done in the past. I think this might have been the third time, but trying to do it in partnership with Evergreen Baptist, and seeing how to partner with them, given that they actually have a lot of former internees or descendants of internees. So one, we want to partner well with Evergreen because their 100th year anniversary and their centennial, but also we wanted to open it up to people in the community that are not Asian American. Like in the past, other non-Asian Americans have joined, but we wanted to make it intentional. So the idea of having bento boxes is something we've done before, but also just preparing the grounds and like why we're doing it. Like for ECVLA, this is their 100th year anniversary, and their church took a huge hit during internment. Many people had to leave. The structure of the church changed afterwards, and that's just one church in the SoCal region. This happened all across the Western Seaboard. So to even take bento, or Reverend Dr. Kevin Doi and his wife prepared little musubis. And even the lore, I don't know if this is true, but the lore is musubis are created in the internment camps. So to bring something like that, eating it on the way, I know in my Filipino culture, we have something called baon, which is like you take food along the way. And I thought, and we all thought, just it would be good to just feed people, like, one, physically, but also nourish them with a reflection guide. So Jillian Garcia and Kevin Doy also developed that last year, but we were able to include more stories from ECBLA's congregation, which is super important for us because we'd be walking with these people and journeying with them for, let's say, 12 hours. It's different when you hear stories from let's say an Instagram post, or like if you hear it, if you can see it in your was it in your history books, like you're not hearing stories, but the community here in SoCal specifically has really done a great job with documenting what happened and even being in connection with the people who were formerly incarcerated. So we wanted to honor their stories and share just one, yes, the harsh treatment, like what they went through, but also the ordinary life and how people were able to persevere in just different ways or remember different stories, from hiding in the laundry room when their aunties were like gossiping. I think stuff like that makes it real, but also shows that they made life there, which for me was a sign of hope, even though what was happening was very, very harsh and very unjust. So yeah, doing things like that and remembering, I know Jason was able to secure some Yakult for some of the buses, and just showing like there's still generosity being circulated around. Like just in the camp, there was generosity among some of the houses or some of the places. Just seeing that even replicated now. So yeah, those are some things that we thought about and wanted to make it really intentional for this time around.
I love that. And I really appreciate how you were able to take some of the traditions that have kind of been established with this pilgrimage, but to also, bring the community together with, a church. I think that really that partnership is really exciting because not only are you able to equip one church, but I think other churches can see a model of what it would look like for them to also go on a pilgrimage or partner with a history institute that could help them along that process. Were there other moments during the pilgrimage that stayed with you? Maybe times when presence really was a big aspect of how you felt in the moment?
Yeah, there were a couple of times. I think what really struck me was when listeners, or if you've ever been there, get to Manzanar, you kind of are guided into what were the barracks, and one of the barracks was the mess hall. And what struck me is in the midst of what was happening to the Japanese community, they could have told like the different histories, but they were also focusing on the little things. Even as much as they were able to make miso, like the miso paste. I thought it was so funny how they were able to create so much miso communally that the when they were released and when they were allowed to go back home, they just had surplus miso. And I just thought that was really interesting, the idea that they didn't know how long they were going to stay there, and they were intentional in saying, this is not the ideal situation, but we're going to try to make this home as much as possible. Or even just the unjust ways that resources were allocated throughout the camp. Sometimes there were guards actually stealing some of the food or hiding it away, like sugar, and creating infighting within the camp. And I thought that was interesting. When you look at how resources are distributed, it's not necessarily the people that need it, but maybe perhaps ask what happened. And so that was an interesting piece of interpersonal relationships at the camp. But also what struck me is the harsh conditions of the actual area itself. I know they used to be home to apple groves and there are mountains, but it's windy, it's sandy, like there are no forestry to block the winds and the sand. So it's like getting in your eye. My hair was like a mess the whole time. Like I advise people bring a hat if you're coming so you can just keep your hair in place. Um, so there's that, but then you have this crazy view of these mountains, like this mountainous valley that you're surrounded by. So it just reminds me of, like, for those Christians that are listening, I look to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. And I'm sure that was a source of much inspiration for the pastors and the Christians on the grounds as well. So yeah, it was a tense experience seeing how they were treated, but also seeing how um, people can truly be resilient in times like this. So yeah, those were some things that I was reflecting on.
Thank you so much for sharing your reflections from, going to the camp and sharing some stories that I haven't heard myself before. These oral histories and just, even written histories are so important because it's these kind of anecdotal stories that kind of tell us so much about what life really was like there for them at the time. And I think also the barracks, how they built different stages of it. That was one thing that really struck me too. Like you said, they were kind of just beautifying the world around them with what they were given, even if it was, very limited. They kind of, I think, when I visited there, and this was years ago, but they had a barracks that kind of represented when camp first opened, and then they had one that was maybe like 1.5 years along or something like that. And to just see the progress that's made in, yeah, these people's lives just from their living conditions, and how they really did try to make the most of their situation despite it being very rough. And I think that also reflecting on just what my great aunt would kind of talk about or share with my aunt, she would really say that life was very normal for them growing up in the camp. I think she was in, her high school, early adulthood. And I think that it's surprising, that they were so into their baseball and their sports and their dances, and they had dance cards. And so they lived a very like normal American life in many ways, but yes, I think that that is something to really remember when we go through hardships ourselves, no matter what they are, that we can really lean on the Lord, look to the mountains, look to the Lord for our inspiration and hope. And I really appreciate you sharing. I also wanted to ask you, how did you think about hospitality in the context of pilgrimage and remembrance?
Yeah, I think it is hard. It is interesting. Pilgrimage is interesting, like the concept of it. If anyone has done a pilgrimage, specifically El Camino de Santiago in Spain, now it's more in style to kind of do it because it's been done like over thousands of years now. So there are like little houses and there are ways to like communicate online. But pilgrimage back in the day was truly dangerous. People would die. People were being robbed, taken advantage of. So to be a pilgrim is a very vulnerable state physically, but it's also vulnerable spiritually and emotionally as well because you're going somewhere expecting something, and it forces you to confront even maybe the not so pleasant parts of yourself. But when you are a pilgrim and you receive generosity, or when somebody offers you musubi or some granola or shares a story, or even the hospitality of sitting with somebody just in silence and just maybe looking at the mountains or taking in the moment, I think that that does something to our sense of humanity and also shared interconnectedness. I know for this pilgrimage, I thought of two things. It made me realize that I am truly Asian American. Like, we always talk about our different ethnicities, right? Oh, I'm Filipino American. But part of being Filipino American is also being Asian American. And and there's a tension there being Filipino American because on one side, my mother and my father were born in the 40s in the Philippines. So they saw a version of Japan that was Empire of the Rising Sun. They saw horrible things happen, but then at the same time in America, Japanese Americans were being interned. And so it split me because growing up, we were told certain stories and we just didn't want to face it, and it kind of carried into our migration story. But what it forced me to confront is one, that these two communities are very different. And there's a difference between empire, what a nation decides to do, and the lives of individual people. And so it really forced me into thinking about the other, not just what they represent culturally, but who they are and how God made them intrinsically. So the person in front of me who's Japanese American, as much as I could bring up what happened in the past in the Philippines, they have nothing to do with that. And I think it's really important that we learn to distinguish and have these conversations, because Filipinos weren't interned. We were considered part of what was it? I think it was a territory of the United States, but we weren't necessarily interred because we were considered nationals, because we were a colony essentially. But at the same time, I look at how communities have changed in that way, and just what it looked like for people to come back home, like the Japanese community to come back home. Some might go back to the cities and it's a whole nother environment. But in this case, there were some beautiful stories of some families like preserving their Japanese neighbors' homes. And I think we need to hear more of that, because you don't necessarily need to be Asian American to be one with the other. You can also be in solidarity as a person who's white, African American, Latino, Latina. And so, like, in terms of the whole hospitality concept, it really forced me to learn, one, my own social location. Like, yes, I am Asian American. Yes, I have all this history as a Filipino American, but it shouldn't change how I look at the person in front of me. And it shouldn't necessarily, like, I want to say, it shouldn't necessarily mean that I just forget what happened in the past, but it shows me different nuances. And I think that's the beautiful thing about history, is that it helps you confront your past, who you are, but it also helps you build and repair after understanding like how you've been complicit, but also how you can create something beautiful with your friends and people that you know. So yeah, that kind of was a little tangential as we were talking, but I think hospitality is just more than just the act of doing, but I think hospitality is actually the act of reflecting, and then doing, for the sake of building and repairing and creating beauty and acknowledging it. So yeah, I kind of see it that way.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I really think that history, like you said, it's a really great learning tool. And I think that the ability to have space like this to reflect, I'm really grateful for. And I hope that anyone listening also is really grateful for the stories that are being shared, both positive and ones that, we can maybe learn to avoid in the future or in the present. And I think that, like you said, the positive stories we sometimes don't tell enough and are overlooked. And I think that that's one thing that I really want to continue to amplify, especially as you brought it up. There were so many people that of many different backgrounds that were willing to help Japanese Americans when their property, all of their, belongings and everything was being taken from them. And I think that all of those things really help rebuild a community, because it could be, honestly easy for those people to also take advantage of the situation in their complicity. But to know that a lot of them offered, to give them everything back basically once, the war was over. And really, I think that helped people move so much further along, because otherwise I think a lot of people maybe went to Chicago or went to start over elsewhere with a $15 and a bus ticket or something like that, so that really, I think, when we also look at mass incarceration in this country and how it affects different demographics, we really need to think about the reintegration process and how that affects the whole of the community and the community's public health, because people are, starting with nothing and really set up to not succeed. I think that that really poses a general issue when it comes to just the livelihood of all of us, because we all rely on each other. And one thing that comes to mind is I did study restorative justice a little when I was in law school. And so one of the practices that gets talked about is called ho'oponopono, which actually is a Hawaiian practice. And that practice really kind of views the community as like a fish net, and any movement within the net causes the entire system and the entire whole of the community to be affected. And so I think that when you mention other people looking out for, those who are being persecuted or oppressed or picked on, I think that sometimes we don't see the effect that it has on us directly, but it definitely affects all of us, even if we are not the overt victim.
Yeah, actually, as you mentioned, like how after incarceration, people actually couldn't go back to their homes, is what I realized because it had been vandalized. But then they started moving east, like to Chicago, as you're mentioning. Since I'm from the East Coast, I was curious, like, were there any internment camps on the East Coast? Like, and there weren't. But afterwards, I think it was 1943. A lot of people just ended up coming to New Jersey, specifically in South Jersey, to this place called Seabrook Farms. And because there's no jobs in California, because a lot of the canneries were like closed, they were able to go to a processing plant, like a frozen food processing plant, and it housed, I think, like, I don't know, like maybe over like 2,000 people from the camps. So granted, after time, I learned that people are realizing, well, this isn't even better than the internment camps. Like, why are we even here? Now we're working, but now we're working in like horrendous conditions. But it gave me an understanding of what relocation looked like because those communities eventually moved up north, like to Jersey City, to Montclair, to New York. Even in New York City, we have a J-Town. Now it's St. Mark's, but St. Mark's was at once J-Town. And then we had a lot of Japanese restaurants. And I was always curious why we had a J-Town. But it really was from that movement of people, whether they were in Seabrook Farms or they just came directly to New York or to New Jersey. And I thought that was fascinating. And realizing even the hospitality of the Quakers in New Jersey. And they were able to help a lot of Japanese former internees like establish themselves on the East Coast because they had virtually nothing if they were not able to go back home. And so even that shows to me like the Christian concept of hospitality. It's more than just saying, oh, here's some food, but no, let us help you relocate here and make a home and recreate community. And I know I was blessed by the Japanese community, like in J-Town, and just all the different ways the Japanese community is actually flourishing in New York City. We have the Japanese American Society there, and like little Japantown in Brooklyn, and it's 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 interesting to see how the new migrants are even interacting with the history of Japanese Americans from the West Coast as well. So yeah, the history of movement is ever present with our families, even if you're from another ethnic group in the diaspora. We're constantly moving, planting, and also extending hospitality and sharing with others, which is kind of cool when you think of the bigger story.
I love that. And I definitely need to visit that area in Brooklyn because I have been to Brooklyn, but I have not been there. So I'll have to definitely make a trip. And while you were sharing about the Quakers, it just also reminded me of something that Bill Watanabe mentioned on episode 1 of this podcast. And he mentioned that the list of people that kind of stood up for Japanese Americans during the war was a very short list, but that the Quakers were on it. And so I think that really in moments of distress, you really remember the people that help you and that have the kindness or generosity or boldness to really, go out and help someone that is in need and that likely won't be able to pay them back in any way, but out of the goodness of their heart and knowing that that is what the Lord really calls us to. And so I also wanted to just before I give you time to kind of share a final thought, I wanted to also ask you about the formation of a pilgrimage and how pilgrimage continues to matter for Asian American Christian leaders and students today.
Yeah, I One, I think it's incredibly important that we experience our history because, one, we don't really get to read it as much. And Dr. Daniel Lee likes to talk about like this time capsule thing that happens with a lot of Asian Americans. Like, we get history passed down from the perspective of our parents, but we don't really get to see this broader narrative of Asian American experience. And so I'm constantly learning from my friends here through their stories. But to do something like Manzanar, this pilgrimage, it for someone like me who is quite justice oriented, it grounds me because because I know sometimes I can get wrapped up in my own emotions and I can vent online or like rage out in different ways. But it grounds me to realize that it's more than just my convictions that are prompting me forward. It is also, I am carrying a legacy with me as an Asian American, and internment is part of it. I might not be directly connected to it because I'm not Japanese American, but the Asian American community is my community and is who I identify with. And so doing a pilgrimage like this, I think it helps us, one, confront our histories, and it also helps us become eyewitnesses to actually testify that this happened. And it is really important we have these monuments to visit and to just be on the ground. I know a lot of us, if we're ever able to go to our home countries, like for me, it's the Philippines. Whenever I'm going there, my feet on the ground feel different. The air feels different. Everything about it changes. The water tastes different. Um, for me, it kind of tastes a little bit like pandan because we put like the thing in it because we put the pandan leaf in it, so it tastes really good to me. Um, but it's this is the idea of it's an embodied experience to pilgrimage, to humble oneself, to accept the hospitality of those around you. But it matters for us as Asian Americans to experience our history and not get wrapped up in other narratives that might want to retell it or adjust it. So yeah, I hope we do more of these. And also, like, there are different places to do pilgrimages too, across the United States. Like, we can go to St. Malo in Louisiana for the first settlement of the Filipino Americans. Like, there are so many places in the East Coast for Chinese Americans to tell their history of faith even. So yeah, the list can go on and on and on and on. I don't want to exhaust it, but I think it's really important that we hear we testify um, for our ancestors, for the people that have gone before us, and never forget. That's the story of the Bible: is we do communion so we don't forget. And when we forget, we learn that harsh atrocities have happened to people when we forget who they are and what was done. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Krystin, for joining me today on the podcast. And I really am so grateful that you were able to be here because when I thought of pilgrimage, I thought of you and your experience on the Camino and how that was so much a part of your story. And then seeing how even Evergreen is continuing to go on these pilgrimages. I know that they recently went to LA's Chinatown together. And so I really look forward to more of these experiential, witness-based pilgrimages and experiences. And hopefully churches will be able to continue partnering with resources like you to bring these things to the communities that they serve. So thank you so much. As we reflect on return, we remember that to revisit sacred places is to reawaken faith, to recognize that the stories we carry are living reminders of the Lord's faithfulness across generations. This series is supported by the Asian American Christian History Institute at Fuller Theological Seminary and is part of a broader effort to honor the lives, legacies, and faith of those who have walked before us. Thank you for listening, and we invite you to join us for the next episode of Pilgrimage, Manzanar, Memory, and Meaning. Thank you, Krystin.
Thanks.